This is Democracy Watch. Okay, Mark, I cannot tell you how many requests I got for this video in particular with you. By now, you've all heard the news that Louisiana will go into the 2024 election with 2 black opportunity congressional districts, but there's a lot of questions about how this kind of shook out. So first of all, is this issue resolved, or is it just dealt with for now and is still kind of remains to be litigated permanently?
Yeah, so look, this is done for 2024. And let me just start by saying, I know there was a lot of back and forth about Louisiana. I think actually you and I talked about the fact that this was going to be a bit of a messy process, but that in the end, I promised everyone in the end, Louisiana would have 2 black opportunity districts for 2024, and they do. I would love to say that this is now resolved for the rest of the election cycle, but no dice. This is resolved for 2024, but the courts are going to pick this up again come 2025 looking forward.
Okay, now the biggest question here, there were 3 liberal justices that dissented from this decision, even though the decision left in place the 2nd Black Opportunity District. Help me explain why and what that means.
Yeah, so look, Democracy Docket actually covered this in real time, that this was a 6-3 decision with the 6 conservative justices on our side. My law firm was among the parties that were litigating this case. So the 6 conservatives were on the side of that we wanted, and the 3 liberal justices dissented. Now, here's why. It's not that the liberal justices don't want there to be 2 black opportunity districts, or, well, I'm not going to speculate on what the 6 conservative justices want, while they're running flags up the flagpole, right, so to speak. But I think that what was at play here is an underlying dispute over the procedural posture of the case. And that is something called the Purcell Doctrine, which basically says that there comes a point before in close proximity to elections that it's simply too late to change the election rules. And conservatives have wanted to move that time period earlier and earlier in the cycle, basically just saying it's too late. And in most cases, that disadvantages voters, because what it means is that if there is a voter suppression law that is struck down close in proximity to an election, that will be stayed. It won't go into effect. That blocking of the law won't take effect for that election cycle. So liberal justices and liberal judges typically want the Purcell cutoff to be very, very close to Election Day. Conservative justices have been moving that earlier and earlier in the process. And in this instance, the moving it earlier in the process benefited those of us who wanted 2 black opportunity districts and disadvantaged a later court decision that would have struck that down. And so I think that's what was playing out in the Supreme Court.
Mark, we don't generally even see a lot of consistency among these conservative justices. They generally just hand down rulings that are beneficial to their party. So why did the conservative Supreme Court justices allow this to stand when they could have simply shown hostility to a 2nd congressional district that would benefit Democrats?
Yeah, great question. And so I'd like to say the answer is superior lawyering, since my partner Abba Khanna filed a brief in the Supreme Court. Shout out there to Abba. But look, I think that it's been a hallmark in the last few Supreme Court terms that we have seen the Supreme Court give some favorable rulings in voting and redistricting cases. Remember, the Supreme Court ruled in our favor in a case also that my law firm litigated. The North Carolina ISL case was a redistricting case. Also, the Alabama case, remember, was a redistricting case that was ruled in favor, in our favor. Again, another case that my law firm litigated. And we've seen those cases sort of in the earlier periods of deciding cases, only to then see when we get to, June, a series of very, very bad decisions for democracy, bad decisions for the country. So I'm not saying that it's quite that Machiavellian, but it has been the case that we sometimes see these more reasonable, favorable decisions in April and May, only then to see the Supreme Court really hold its worst decisions for June.
Now, you mentioned that your law firm was involved in litigating this case. For those watching right now, if you want to support the work that Mark and his team are doing, and that work is especially valuable, I think, as we're seeing right now, the best way to do that is to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything in voting and elections. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. So, Mark, with this resolution to this case now, are there maps, are all of the country's maps basically set for the 2024 election as they stand right now?
Yeah, so look, I think as a practical matter, since they said, since the six justices said it is now too late to have there be a new map in Louisiana, that we should assume that the maps that you have seen that we have in place now are the maps that we are going to see for 2024. But I want to point out that there are a couple of really important cases that are still pending. Number one, the Supreme Court is continuing to sit on a very, very important racial gerrymandering case out of South Carolina. Inexcusable, one of the most inexcusable delays that I have experienced in my career.
I like how you say one of, because another case that they're waiting on is to determine whether or not we have a king in this country, and so they're really taking their time with some cases that ought to be resolved pretty damn quickly.
Yeah, so that's right. I mean, look, they have still not resolved the Trump immunity case, which is effectively denying the people of the country a timely trial in the federal court case, regardless of how that case gets resolved. The use of the time of the calendar here has done damage, has done real damage,
yeah,
for sure. But this South Carolina case, I would actually say, is even more egregious, because this case was teed up for the Supreme Court in the beginning of the fall, at the beginning of their term, and both parties told them they needed a decision by January, and it is now May, and we don't yet have a decision. So I would say that just for pure delay purposes, this case stands by itself.
Well, to that point, I mean, you just mentioned South Carolina. What else are we waiting on in terms of unresolved maps thus far?
Yeah, so it's funny, we've started asking people for questions at Democracy Docket, so people can go on the site and submit their questions. And one of the questions I've gotten a lot recently is about Texas, right? The Texas maps have been challenged since 2021, since they were passed. And that case in Texas is not moving fast. But Texas is a big state that you and I oftentimes don't talk a lot about because it's moved so slowly. But we're talking about 6 congressional districts that are being challenged, that as you now look forward to 2026, we gotta all be pushing for Texas to get that case resolved, because it is a big chunk of business for the courts there to handle, where you have both Voting Rights Act challenges and also racial gerrymandering claims. So Texas is a case. If you start to look at 2026 litigation, I'd focus there. Also Florida. Big important case in Florida over whether the district, one of the districts there, is constitutional. But we're still, Democracy Docket's still tracking other states like Utah, where there's a case still pending about in the state courts. So, redistricting is not going to be over just because we may be past the point of it mattering for 2024. In addition to the Louisiana case, there are a number of others. Georgia, is going up to the 11th Circuit. So lots to track.
And of course, I'd argue that it's especially important to stay on top of this stuff after the election, when people stop paying attention, because you're going to have a ton of work to do with regard to all of those states as we head into 2025 and beyond. Let's finish off with this. We have seen all of these scattershot rulings, these scattershot cases. What's the ultimate solution here, so that we're not constantly presented with all of these illegal or abusive challenges to the maps on a rolling basis by Republicans?
Yeah, so look, the solution to this is for Congress to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The Congress has the authority to decide what the rules are for redistricting and for map drawing, at least for congressional maps. And it is high time that Congress pass that legislation. The problem is that there are no Republican votes for it. If you go back and you look at how close we came to passing meaningful redistricting legislation, voting rights legislation, election reform legislation in those 3 bills, if you take those 3 bills combined, do you know how many votes they got, how many Republican votes they got in the House of Representatives?
It's not looking like a big number.
Zero. Not a single Republican voted for any of those 3 bills, notwithstanding the fact that, in 2006, the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized 98-0 in the Senate, and with only 33 Republican no votes in the House. The party of Trump has moved the Republican Party so far off the scale against democracy that we just accept as a norm now, that Republicans are going to contest at every election result. They're going to gerrymander every map. They're going to try to strike down the Voting Rights Act. They're going to try to racially gerrymander. We just take these things as for granted right now. And you cannot have a healthy democracy if one political party is at every turn fighting against it. So we need congressional legislation, but we also need the Republican Party to once and for all, reform itself, reject the hate-filled, anti-democratic message that Donald Trump has brought to the Republican Party.
That's exactly right. And also, all of this just underscores the importance of the work that you and your team are doing. So for those watching, again, if you're not yet signed up for Democracy Docket and you want to support the work that Marc and his team are doing, please go ahead and sign up. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.